author, speaker, mother, and radio host. It's Jennifer Fulwiler. And we're back on the Catholic Channel.
Well, it's about time.
SiriusXM 129.
Jen Fulwiler, so delighted to have you with me here this afternoon. Come say hello at thejffshow.com. So much good stuff going on the show today. And this whole hour is really my science nerd hour. I was just talking about how excited I am about the eclipse coming up on August 21st. We have all these big plans. I am actually on the air when the eclipse is happening, which is just like the coolest thing ever. And right now I am so excited to be chatting with Brad Cooper. He has an organization called Purpose Nation that encourages Christians to pursue work in the sciences. And this is so needed. I mean, scientists in the U.S. are less than half as likely to identify themselves as religious than the general population. And I'm sure you've seen this. I mean, not to stereotype, but I know a lot of people who work in engineering, medical science, physics, that kind of thing. And they will say that it's maybe not as bad as the stereotypes would indicate, but yeah, there is kind of a culture of atheism in these fields. And this is crazy. We absolutely need to change that. As I was quoting Brother Guy Consolmagno, the Vatican astronomer, who always talks about how faith and science naturally go hand in hand. And he believes that for himself, having faith has made him a better scientist. So I'm very excited to chat about this. Brad Cooper, welcome to the Jennifer Fulwiler Show.
Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Really enjoy your show. Thankful for all your testimony and ministry and everything you're doing, and geeking out with you here about science. So love the beginning of the show here, and also looking forward to the eclipse. But like you, I'm going to miss it too. So I'm kind of bummed about that as well.
I know. Well, yeah. So what's happening that you can't make it? Are you traveling or something?
Well, it's just. Yeah, it's business. So, we're going to talk about purpose in a minute, but it's a high-tech exec, and we got a family, and there's a lot of things going on. So would love to make it. We'll try to view it, the partial, at least from here. We're in Southern California, so we'll see a little bit of it, but not the full experience.
Yeah. And Brad, what I was talking at the beginning of the show about this great chat or a talk that I heard by Brother Guy Consolmagno, he's a Jesuit brother in the Vatican astronomer. And man, I need to get a copy of that talk. If I can, I will send it to you, because it just blew my mind, where he made this incredible case that said, being a great scientist just naturally glorifies God. I mean, you don't have to sort of jam in like, I'm going to work the name of Jesus into every single sentence. I mean, you naturally glorify God and his creation by being a good scientist. And then he would say that being a man of faith has actually made him a better scientist. He's more humble, for example. Just, being, as Christians, we're called to be humble. And all of our best scientific discoveries in history came from an attitude of humility, a feeling of smallness in the grand scheme of things. And I mean, you obviously founded Purpose Nation. I mean, you must kind of see this connection that being a person of faith actually puts you in a position to be an amazing scientist.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And so, Purpose Nation, one of the things we've been doing is talking to scientists as well as people in high tech, and there's related fields, and I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, they absolutely say, that it goes one way or the other. Either they're Christians and then they become scientists, and part of that is because they just see the awe of God in nature, and and like you did, and so that either causes them to go into science, and then they look at the science that they do from a different lens, or they're already scientists, and then they convert to Christianity, and then they look at their work in a whole new way and see meaning into the science that they're looking at. But as far as what they actually do, it energizes them. These are many people in the science fields. People don't necessarily always understand this, but they may spend 20 years of their career or more, 30 years, sort of going after one scientific question. And unless there's something really meaningful that comes out of the end of something like that, then it's tough work. But yes, exactly like you said, it encourages them, gives meaning to the work that they're doing.
Yeah. And Brad, I'm so glad that you founded Purpose Nation. People can look it up at purposenation.org. And you have a podcast as well. People can search for that on iTunes. Because I've often thought, Brad, I mentioned earlier, my dad is an engineer. I mean, I just grew up around astronomers, engineers, physicists, those kind of people. We always really admired that kind of thing. And that was just sort of the culture that I grew up in. And I've often thought I have a couple of children that I think just have a natural mind for the sciences. I think they would be great physicists or astronomers or, doctors working in the medical field somehow. And I have to admit, Brad, I would be a little nervous about sending my child off to, especially like a really good program, let's say for physics. And maybe this is a stereotype, but in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking, I know that they're going to be surrounded by a bunch of atheists, and I think of my kids as having a strong faith, but maybe that's part of the reason that some parents are not encouraging their kids to go into those fields. I mean, I wouldn't take it so far as to tell them not to study in that program, but there would be a part of me that thinks, gosh, this is frustrating that, they're heading off to atheist land if they're going into the, biomedical engineering degree at some top school.
Right. Yeah. And that's a question I've asked some of the scientists I've spoken to. So Jonathan Fang, who's a physicist right here in Irvine, he talked about that a little bit. He actually has many physicists and other people he worked with who are Christians. So they're actually, and he finds there in physics, there's a lot of support. Actually, in some other fields that I think you and I also went into, which is computer science.
Yeah.
And high tech. I'm actually finding that there are fewer, at least Christians that are out in front and kind of out there with their faith. That actually in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, which, we're willing to send our kids to go do, be programmers all day long and go work for Apple, or Google, where the rate of atheism could be even higher. We just don't have a lot of data on it. And then also, the other thing I'll say too is a lot of our children will have a calling to go to places like Africa and work where there's in very dangerous conditions. And one of the things I did was work for an organization called World Vision and was just blessed to see some of the work there. But there's a lot of dangerous conditions that we could be sending our children off to. But, you don't hear anybody saying, oh, why are you doing that? You're going to run into a lot of, things that are going to challenge them in their faith and all that. But, as Christians, we've sort of made that leap, and it sort of makes sense, to go serve the poor. Well, one of the things one of the astronomers and astrobiologists that I talked to is actually a great Catholic guy, Professor Jonathan Lunine. He's actually one of the top physicists at Cornell. Brother Guy that you just mentioned was one of the key reasons he actually went into the Catholic faith. He had a long story. You can hear it on the podcast. It's actually our first episode of the podcast. Just an amazing story. But one of the things he said at the end of the interview, when I asked him, very similar question to what you just stated, and he said, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Yeah. Use your faith, give you strength. Now, as you said, you do sort of have to gear up, right? You do have to equip yourself. You have to be ready with those challenges and people who may challenge you in your faith and have all the data and some of the things that you were mentioning earlier here in the segment about the Big Bang and something. You don't have to be an expert, but at least have your basics down in terms of the things that you know. But the other thing I'll say, Jennifer, too, though, is atheists have sort of put us on the defensive.
Yeah.
Which really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the case. As you said, there's lots of historical Christians who led the way in science. But not only that, we sort of have to get past that as Christians. There's this compatibility issue that the people I interviewed, they're sort of getting, actually, frankly, a little tired of it, because why is there this concern, even among Christians, that there's some compatibility issue with science and faith? And there really isn't. As you talked about, there's a lot of scientific evidence. But then as far as our calling goes, so God, calls us, the two big commandments are to love God, with all your heart and your soul and your mind, and then also to love each other. In doing that, what better way to do that than through science, and not scientism, as you said, but using science as God's gift. So, if you love someone like you love the Lord, why not learn more about them? Why not explore God's creation? And you can do that. What a better way to do that through science? Same thing with loving each other. What better way to do that than to come up with cures for diseases, to ease suffering? A lot of the things that we do as Christians to address those things are a little more on the symptomatic side. We kind of address the symptoms. As scientists or even as technologists, using God's gifts, you may actually come up with something that helps millions or billions of people through some discovery in either science or technology. So I really feel like atheists have sort of put us on the defensive and made us fearful when we shouldn't be. We should, trust in God and be willing to accept that calling in science or technology if that's what's calling you to do.
I love it. And I so love it that you founded this organization, Purpose Nation, and that you have a podcast. It's a new podcast. I actually just subscribed to it. People can search for Purpose Nation on iTunes, I use Podcruncher, wherever they follow their podcasts. It's the Purpose Nation podcast. And you do great interviews there where you talk about this exact kind of thing, Christianity and the sciences. I really encourage people to check it out. And I love what you said about, it's like John Paul II said, be not afraid. And if your child is saying, hey, I'm thinking about going into a career in this field, let's say it's a field that is kind of known for its atheism. I know you and I both have backgrounds in the high tech world. That's where I met my husband. We were both working at a tech startup. And I don't think there was actually a single Christian at our entire company. I mean, it was just not the culture at all. And so, I think some parents might have a little bit of fear, like what would that do to my child's faith if they end up there? But we can't live our lives making our decisions based on fear. And we should look at it as an opportunity, like say, great, that's fantastic. You will learn more about God's creation. You will be able to contribute to the world in a new way. And who knows, you might actually influence some of your colleagues.
Yeah, and the only way to change it is to actually go into those fields, right? And so if there is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if we decide not to send our children there, that just sort of reinforces the whole problem. And there are people who are there. And like you said, so I was, you mentioned you had a show yesterday about how you met your spouse. I met my wife actually at Apple.
Oh, that's awesome.
Both there. And, there's Christian groups there too. So there are Christian groups, again, it's a little, even high tech, it's harder for people to come out and sort of say, yeah, I'm going to be out there with their faith. One of the folks it's an interview that I'm going to be posting next week is with a guy named Pat Gelsinger. He's the CEO of a company called VMware. It's a $40 billion company.
Wow.
And he's a Christian who's out there with his faith. And he actually, it's kind of a funny thing. He calls VMware, his company, he's the pastor of his company.
Wow,
and that's not something you normally can say as the CEO of a $40 billion high-tech company. And granted, he's rare. He's sort of the first one I've found that's sort of that out there and that high level. But they're definitely out there. And so, again, don't be afraid. There's lots of groups you can find within companies. They actually have prayer meetings. He was at Intel for many years. He was actually their youngest vice president. And he started a prayer group there at Intel. And that's actually the case at many organizations, many companies. You'll find this as well. So at UC Irvine, the physicist that I mentioned, Jonathan Fang, they have prayer groups there. They get together. So there are groups of people in science and in high technology in these companies and these universities and there's also obviously lots of there's Cru, and there's all these other, there's Catholic kind of student groups as well, where you can sort of still reinforce your faith and your belief and kind of gird up. And then you can sort of, let the atheists come and not worry about it.
Yeah. And, Brad, and again, I'm so glad to be having these discussions. Really encourage people to look you up at purposenation.org. And I think that one of the things, I didn't work in the sciences per se, but I think the high tech world has a lot of overlap there. And the type of programming I did, it wasn't like Java or C++ or anything, but I did like PHP programming, having, web interfaces, work with databases. All of my listeners are like, wow, who cares? Anyway, I did I made websites work with databases. We'll leave it at that. And I was an atheist at the time. And I did feel like that work in a way, because I didn't receive this well-rounded education in which I understood the role of philosophy and, the right way to sort of approach evaluating life's big questions, that, the elegance that you have when you write some code and it all works and it's all perfect. And it's this binary, it works or it doesn't. There is no gray area, like your code gets the stuff out of the database or it does not. And there's nothing else to be evaluated there really. It got me in this sort of way of evaluating life that way. I needed everything to be just perfect and have a crystal clear answer. And I think that kind of fueled my atheistic beliefs. But now I can use my love of programming to sort of see God's design in the world and to take it to a broader picture. But I think a lot of our young people, because they don't have the kind of education to be able to understand the way they should evaluate the world, they end up with this very narrow view where they kind of evaluate their whole life experience like you would evaluate whether your code works. Have you seen that, Brad?
Right. Well, and if you look at the background in a lot of the folks I've talked to, math is definitely a big component. They love math. And you can, as you said, if you don't have that sort of faith background, you could use and try to apply math to everything. You absolutely could. But they've obviously, gone beyond that and seen the beauty. And you can see beauty in math. There's lots of people who do that too, and their formulas, and scientists, physicists in particular. But I think it's more of a search for the truth.
Yeah.
And I think, based on what I've heard of your story, that was a big part of it. And so you can search for the truth in, as you said, in love, and there's other things that are not scientific that sort of bring you closer to God and search for the truth. But math and science and even technology, there's things that you can, as you said, in the coding even, where it can bring you to the truth. Now, you either can choose to sort of take it to the extreme where only math and logical thinking can give you insights in the truth, or you sort of have that other perspective. But that was a fairly common theme. And the other thing I'll say, Jennifer, too, is, a lot of people may be saying, whoa, this is not something either I want to do, or like you were saying, a little bit of fear there. It's not just, thinking about, even yourself, but also in others. So one of the things that was a common theme in the interviews that I did is that there were people who were inserted at various points in these people's lives where it could have gone in a totally different direction. And so Jonathan Lunine, Professor Lunine that I mentioned, he was off going to be a doctor. He kind of was going off in different directions. Same thing with a few of the other folks I talked to. Things like their, parents, even grandparents, mothers and grandmothers, believe it or not, were people that were influential in the lives of these scientists at various points in their lives. Reading science books to them, encouraging them. Jonathan Lunine's mother actually encouraged him to write to Carl Sagan. He read one of Carl Sagan's books, and it sort of just, got him excited about it. And she's like, oh, why don't you try to write to Carl Sagan? He's like, yeah, come on, Mom. He's like a famous scientist. He's at Cornell. He's got this TV show and stuff. Right. He's not going to write back to me. And he said, okay, fine, I'll write. He wrote a beautiful 2-page letter back to him, just encouraging him. And here's the exact steps that you take to become an astronomer. And that set him off on his path. So my point is that you don't have to want to be, or you feel like God has wired you to be a scientist or to be somebody in technology, but to at least encourage the curiosity, the search for the truth, and read science books to them. Be open to them. Let them watch the science documentaries and kind of geek out on stuff if that's where they are being called by God, and just supporting them. And that's a big part of it. And what I see from these kind of top scientists and people in tech that they experienced in their lives.
Yep. And that's something that we've been doing, Brad, with my son. Quite a few of my kids, I think, have a real aptitude for kind of math scientists, but he's my oldest. So since he's my oldest, we're kind of doing all the experiments on him. And right. My oldest is 12. So we're just now getting to that age where we can kind of have these discussions. And one of the things I've done is just had an honest conversation with him. He really wants to be a programmer. I think he will, maybe even computer engineering. He likes that kind of thing. And so I've just told him, I said, when you are, like, he's taking some online programming classes. And I said, look, you are probably going to be one of the few Christians when you're in these forums asking questions of teachers and other students. I mean, it probably won't come up, but you will probably hear passing comments that assume an atheistic worldview. And I want you to know, just don't be surprised. Don't be caught off guard by that. And if you have any questions, if people are bringing up good points, great. We love when people ask questions about our faith, and just, let me know if you have any questions in these conversations. And I think that's another thing we can do with kids who are interested in exploring these kind of fields, is to just equip them and say, just let me know. And if I don't know the answer, which I may very well not, I'm happy to get a book. I'll call that really smart priest I know. I'll call that pastor. We will get you answers, but don't just, encounter people in this world and these fields who say, oh, well, that makes no sense, and just take it at face value. Just come to me or to some other believer, and work out these questions. Because this is what I found, Brad, in my conversion. Christianity has been around for 2,000 years. It has fielded a lot of tough questions, and it has some pretty good answers.
Yes, it does. And as you said, there are definitely people you can talk to. I mean, so you had Lee Strobel on last week. I love him too. Great, Christian, and wrote about a lot of these questions that atheists will have. So there's lots of ways to equip yourself with books like that, people around you. And even at these companies, you will find some of them may be hiding, but they're there, and they're going to support you. Even at some of the so another guy that I had on the second episode of the podcast, he actually was at Google for 7 years.
Wow! And
he was in Africa for many years, but a great, strong Christian, great family guy, and he went off and started his own app. It's a Christian prayer meditation app It's great. It's called Abide. And
Abide? Oh, I'll have to look that up. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's Abide, and there's a link to it on the podcast page there. But anyway, he was at Google for 7 years, and I did ask him, some of those questions about, was he challenged and all that. And for the most part, people aren't there attacking you. I mean, these are companies; they're professional people. I mean, they're not. It's very rare, actually. I personally, in being a high tech for 25 years now, I've never had anybody sort of question my faith or anything like that. I hear a lot of the same things from the scientists I talk to. Very rarely, occasionally, you'll have somebody come up to you. Pat Gelsinger has a great story about a guy who confronted him in the hallway, and that was just a very funny and amazing experience where he confronted him. But he actually, you use Pat as another example, but he was a great witness, even within a company like Intel. So the CEO of Intel, he told a story about that, where he used to use some profanity in things like meetings and things like that. And Pat took him aside one time, and this is his boss. And he said, I really appreciate it. Maybe if you would not use some of those profanities so much. And he was just all concerned that he did that. He's like, oh, what did I just do? It turns out the CEO's wife came up to Pat one time at a dinner, and he said, Pat, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that to him. I guess apparently he stopped doing that. But anyway,
wow, that is so cool.
Yes. But there's lots of people there who you may not even know. So again, as you said earlier, be not afraid. Just go in there armed with whatever you have. Don't worry about it. And again, we're on the defensive, and we shouldn't be. We should be out there proactively. There's potential cures for cancer and diseases, and in the medical field, there are technologies that could help people who are starving in Africa. I mean, there's 16,000 children still that die every day in Africa. I mean, there's big challenges we have, and we need Christians to be there. They need to be at the table when people are talking about artificial intelligence. There's these transhumanists out there who really have some really nutty things to say, and we're not there. We're not there at those tables, and we do need to be competent in all of these fields. But there's lots of challenges that we're facing here in humanity, and Christians need to be there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially as technology gets more powerful. I mean, we just have some amazing things going on that can be used for good, that can really, help cure diseases. Right. And in fact, we had a Father Tad. I am not going to pronounce his last name correctly, so I'll just call him Father Tad, and he's a priest. But he has this incredible background. He has degrees in philosophy, biochemistry, molecular cell biology, another one in chemistry. He's got his PhD in neuroscience from Yale, and he's worked at Harvard Med School, and he's a priest. And he's really wading into these fields of bioethics. And, he's not being extreme about it. He said, there are actually a lot of really good things going on that sometimes people in Christian circles, they hear about it, they misunderstand how this technology is actually being used. So sometimes he is actually educating Christians and saying, let me tell you the details about this one medical technology. It's actually not that bad when you know what they're doing. But then this other thing over here that might sound fine, that one's actually really scary, and we need to look at this one. And what would we do without voices like this? Like if he had said, oh, well, I want to be a priest, so I shouldn't get that PhD in neuroscience from Yale. I mean, think about what a tremendous voice our culture would be missing.
Right, and that's, again, I keep bringing back Pat Gelsinger, but that was actually a decision point that he reached. He either wanted to be a pastor or he wanted to go work at Intel.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be that stark of a choice. And he figured that out. Or he didn't figure it out. God sort of said, okay, here's your answer. You're going to be a pastor and you're going to go work for Intel. And he's like, okay, how do I do that? But bringing your faith and your purpose into your work and seeking out those things that, God can use you for. And again, there's many challenges. Yeah. So you mentioned just in terms of recognition in Christians. So yeah, one of the other statistics that was very concerning to me was that something like only 1 in 4 Christians even have an interest in reading science news.
Oh, wow.
So we have a compounding set of challenges here where there aren't enough Christians in these fields. There are people at very high levels who are usually atheist. Especially, in some of the high levels of academia and then also in technology. But we've got some very serious issues that I sort of look at it as Christians, we're very well prepared for the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
There's a good chance he may not be come like a thief in the night, but I feel like the future is coming like a thief in the night to us as Christians, and we just need to be prepared for it, and we need to, encourage people to seek out a calling. And it obviously has to be a calling. All of this, we can talk about, all of this and still not be a calling for someone in particular, but just being open to it, exploring these things and saying, hey, God, is there something that you want to use me for? And I realize there may be some challenges, and I realize that there may not be a lot of Christians in this field, but God, help me to understand if this is something you want me to be a part of.
I love it. I really encourage people to follow the great work that you're doing at the Purpose Nation podcast. Just go search for that on iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And of course, the website is purposenation.org. And Brad, before we run out of time, I actually wanted to get your assistance with something. So I was at a get together with some of my husband's friends. It was a kind of college thing. A bunch of people from business schools, stuff like that were there. And I ended up in a conversation with a very friendly atheist guy. And he was one of these really sweet people who was great to talk to. He thought the fact that my husband and I both came to faith was interesting, and we were talking about that. And he said something like, well, I just couldn't really buy into a belief system without proof. And I said something that was so inarticulate. I said something like, well, God can't be proven, and there are, not every single thing we believe should be something that it has, proof in the sense of like a courtroom, proof. And actually, you can hear right now, I don't do a good job of explaining this. When this sort of subject comes up, how do you explain to someone that, on the one hand, what we believe in matters of faith was never meant to be proven in a scientific laboratory? If you're approaching it that way, sure, you will never find God, because that is not the way it was meant to be approached. But on the other hand, Christianity does not believe that you have to check your brain at the door. There is absolutely, I wrote about this in my book, there is good evidence, good reasons to believe what we believe. Do you kind of have your own concise way when someone thinks that you have to set aside all reason to, have Christian beliefs? Do you have kind of an elevator pitch answer for that?
I don't know if I'd say that an elevator pitch. It's usually a longer conversation, unfortunately. And if somebody's looking for sort of a response, and I have to say this is sort of what I'm trying actually to go against a little bit. And I'll answer your question. But what I was trying to say is that they're putting us on the defensive, and I don't feel like we should be. I think if they see that Christians are in sciences and they're top Christians that are there, they should look at Christians and say they're the ones leading the charge. They're actually the ones who are leading, the search for life on other planets, like Dr. Lunine is. He may be part of a team that actually discovers life. It's there in Enceladus, which is one of the moons of Saturn. There are very top scientists who are out there. They're top. I sort of just ignore the question to some extent and kind of move on, because they're trying to trap you. But there's lots of things in science that don't. Yeah, they're putting you on the defensive to avoid kind of realizing the other issue, which is the moral issue, and these other things. Is sort of a distraction, and they think they're looking for a gotcha. Yes, you can have lots of responses. I mean, one is that I use. Obviously, the multiverse is not probably something that we are going to be able to prove. String theory, which they've been trying to come up with something for it for 30 years. Most likely, there's a good chance that it may not ever be proven. There's lots of things in science that people spend their careers on, decades on. There have been people that are working on string theory for 30 years, and it's most likely might not ever be proven. And so it doesn't mean that it's not important. It's not important to humanity or important to us in trying to find the truth. And yes, we are going to look for things that are true, and we'd love to have some proof for it. But there's lots of things that all of us have faith in, including the multiverse and including string theory, that don't have truth or don't have a proof for and may never.
Brad, that is such a great answer. Yeah, so I love that vision of someone comes up to you and says, well, I don't think faith is compatible with reason. And your answer is, you know what, I'm really busy on my master's thesis about orbital mechanics. So can I get back to you on that? And then I have to go to church. And so can we have that discussion another time? Well, Brad Cooper, we're about out of time, but this has been a blast. I have had so much fun chatting with you. I really, really encourage people to check out the work that you're doing at Purpose Nation. I think it is so important. Tell us again where people can find all the great stuff that you're doing.
Okay, purposenation.org. We're actually also working on a book. It might come out sometime next year. But right now, yes, purposenation.org. Follow our podcast and the interviews, and we'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much. Jennifer.
Yeah, Brad, this has been so much fun. We definitely want to talk to you again soon. And in the meantime, keep up the great work.
Thank you, Jennifer. Love being on the show. Thank you, and keep up your good work as well. God bless you.
All right, thanks. Take care. And we will be back with more after this. I know a lot of people who work in engineering, medical science, physics, that kind of thing, and they will say that it's maybe not as bad as the stereotypes would indicate, but yeah, there is kind of a culture of atheism in these fields. And this is crazy. We absolutely need to change that. As I was quoting Brother Guy Consolmagno, the Vatican astronomer, who always talks about how faith and science naturally go hand in hand. And he believes that for himself, having faith has made him a better scientist. So I'm very excited to chat about this. Brad Cooper, welcome to the Jennifer Fulwiler Show.
Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Really enjoy your show. Thankful for all your testimony and ministry and everything you're doing, and geeking out with you here about science. So love the beginning of the show here, and also looking forward to the eclipse. But like you, I'm going to miss it too. So I'm kind of bummed about that as well.
I know. Well, yeah. So what's happening that you can't make it? Are you traveling or something?
Well, it's just. Yeah, it's business. So, we're going to talk about purpose in a minute, but it's a high-tech exec, and we got a family, and there's a lot of things going on. So would love to make it. We'll try to view it, the partial, at least from here. We're in Southern California, so we'll see a little bit of it, but not the full experience. Yeah,
and Brad, what I was talking at the beginning of the show about this great chat or a talk that I heard by Brother Guy Consolmagno. He's a Jesuit brother in the Vatican astronomer. And man, I need to get a copy of that talk. If I can, I will send it to you, because it just blew my mind, where he made this incredible case that said, being a great scientist just naturally glorifies God. I mean, you don't have to sort of jam in like, I'm going to work the name of Jesus into every single sentence. I mean, you naturally glorify God and his creation by being a good scientist. And then he would say that being a man of faith has actually made him a better scientist. He's more humble, for example. Just, being, as Christians, we're called to be humble. And all of our best scientific discoveries in history came from an attitude of humility, a feeling of smallness in the grand scheme of things. And I mean, you obviously founded Purpose Nation. I mean, you must kind of see this connection that being a person of faith actually puts you in a position to be an amazing scientist.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, Purpose Nation, one of the things we've been doing is talking to
author, speaker, mother, and radio host. It's Jennifer Fulwiler. And we're back on the Catholic Channel.
Well, it's about time.
SiriusXM 129.
Jen Fulwiler, so delighted to have you with me here this afternoon. Come say hello at thejffshow.com. So much good stuff going on the show today. And this whole hour is really my science nerd hour. I was just talking about how excited I am about the eclipse coming up on August 21st. We have all these big plans. I am actually on the air when the eclipse is happening, which is just like the coolest thing ever. And right now I am so excited to be chatting with Brad Cooper. He has an organization called Purpose Nation that encourages Christians to pursue work in the sciences. And this is so needed. I mean, scientists in the U.S. are less than half as likely to identify themselves as religious than the general population. And I'm sure you've seen this. I mean, not to stereotype, but
scientists as well as people in high tech, and there's related fields, and I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, they absolutely say, that it goes one way or the other. Either they're Christians and then they become scientists, and part of that is because they just see the awe of God in nature, and and like you did, and so. That either causes them to go into science, and then they look at the science that they do from a different lens, or they're already scientists, and then they convert to Christianity, and then they look at their work in a whole new way and see meaning into the science that they're looking at. But as far as what they actually do, it energizes them. These are many people in the science fields. People don't necessarily always understand this, but they may spend 20 years of their career or more, 30 years, sort of going after one scientific question, and unless there's something really meaningful that comes out of the end of something like that, then it's tough work. But yes, exactly like you said, it encourages them, gives meaning to the work that they're doing.
Yeah. And Brad, I'm so glad that you founded Purpose Nation. People can look it up at purposenation.org. And you have a podcast as well. People can search for that on iTunes. Because I've often thought, Brad, I mentioned earlier, my dad is an engineer. I mean, I just grew up around astronomers, engineers, physicists, those kind of people. We always really admired that kind of thing. And that was just sort of the culture that I grew up in. And I've often thought I have a couple of children that I think just have a natural mind for the sciences. I think they would be great physicists or astronomers or, doctors working in the medical field somehow. And I have to admit, Brad, I would be a little nervous about sending my child off to, especially like a really good program, let's say for physics. And maybe this is a stereotype, but in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking, I know that they're going to be surrounded by a bunch of atheists, and I think of my kids as having a strong faith, but maybe that's part of the reason that some parents are not encouraging their kids to go into those fields. I mean, I wouldn't take it so far as to tell them not to study in that program, but there would be a part of me that thinks, gosh, this is frustrating that, they're heading off to atheist land if they're going into the, biomedical engineering degree at some top school.
Right. Yeah. And that's a question I've asked some of the scientists I've